part of your Saturday to engage in this critical question. Are we going to live under our own laws as an independent country, or are we going to be part of what the European Union is turning into? Thank you all for coming. Thank you also to all the panellists, not only for giving up part of their day to speak, but also for being people in the private sector generating revenue. You know, I always think we politicians should say this more often. And let me extend, as well as to Carl and Andrea, Andrea and Amjad were both proper business people before they were elected. Let me extend the same sentiment to all of you in this room who are involved with businesses. You know, politicians are very good, and quite rightly, at saying thank you to nurses and teachers and soldiers, and absolutely we should. But we should, from time to time, remember to say thank you to the people who are generating all the revenue that pays for the nurses and the doctors and the teachers and for us. You're one of the people in this room who had a go, started a business, who's getting up, and has never properly been thanked. Do you know what? I think we should say this on every occasion, and I'm going to say it now. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for paying my salary, but I hope not for much longer. Not for much longer. And I particularly, of course, want to thank Amjad for putting this meeting on. Amjad is a model member of the European Parliament. He's never forgotten that it's his role to represent the interests of Yorkshire people in Brussels, rather than, as so many MEPs over the years have done, to come and speak for Brussels in Yorkshire. Yes. So, thank you. You are a great patriot, a great Yorkshireman, and Uncle G, you are a great friend. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me begin with a little story. God Almighty is looking down on the world, and he becomes wroth at the sinfulness of mankind. He decides he's going to start again. He's going to send a flood and begin all over again, but he's going to save one good man. So, he sends his archangel to find the one good man who's called Noah, or if you are Muslims in the room, who's called, I think he's called Ibn Lamech, isn't he? Ibn Lamech in the Islamic tradition. Those of you who are Sikhs and from other religions, doesn't matter, you'll pick up the story. The archangel comes down and he says to Noah, he says, the Lord commands that you build an ark, and that you hew it of cedar wood and gopher wood. And Noah says, oh, no, I can't do that. That would be against the EU's sustainable habitat. Gabriel carries on, it should be 30 cubits by 50 cubits by 100 cubits. Cubits, says Noah. Oh, no. Can't possibly work in cubits. That would contravene the EU's metrication directive. Undeterred, the archangel carries on, and he commands that you fill it with all living things that crawl on the earth, or fly in the sky, or swim in the sea, each male and female after its kind. And Noah says, have you not heard of the EU's Transport of Live Animals Directive? Gabriel or Jibril is very puzzled by this, and he goes back to the and he says, Lord, what is this EU whereof thy children speak? And God says, the EU, verily, the EU is the reason I'm sending the flood. Tell you what, my friends, he's sending the flood now, both in terms of the euro crisis and in terms of the Schengen crisis. And in a sense, the only question before us in this referendum is whether we have to make those problems our problems. And we have got options. We didn't join the euro. We didn't dismantle our borders vis-à-vis the rest of the EU, so we do have other choices. Are we going to make those problems ours for the next decade? Or are we going to reorient to the rest of the world, the bits of the world which are still growing? Maybe the best way that I can answer that question is to take you back to my first day at work as an MEP. As Amjad said, I was elected in 1999, but I'll never forget my first day in the European Parliament. found my office, I did the basic tour, and then I went to hand in my ticket for reimbursement. And I was given an enormous sum of money. And I said to the nice lady, no, you've made a terrible mistake here. I've only come from London. And she said, no, there's no mistake, monsieur. That's the mileage rate from Heathrow, or the kilometrage rate, obviously, she said. But it can't be. I mean, there's no way that you could spend this amount of money flying from Heathrow to Brussels. That's right, sir, she said brightly. That's how we work it out. It's done on the most expensive notional business class fare, plus your time and distance allowance.
Wow.
Well, you can work this out for yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. If you actually were taking the most expensive notional business class fare, booked 5 minutes before you got on board, you would make a not unimportant sum of money. But if you're prepared to fly EasyJet or Ryanair or drive, well, you could be easily trousering 700, 800, 900 quid a week, every week. Tax-free, because of course it counts as expenses, not income. Then I went on to the next person. This was the person who advises you about your secretarial allowance. And, she said, you have 14,000 euros a month. And I said, gosh, that's an awful lot of money. I mean, again, you can work this out. I could have a very good press officer and a very good secretary, maybe someone working in the constituency and a researcher, and I'd still have quite a lot left over. Well, of course, in those days, it was very common for people to use the surplus to employ their wife, or their godson, or their favourite nephew, or whatever the case may be. Now, I'd love to be able to tell you that British MEPs were above that kind of thing. But the truth is, people respond to incentives wherever they are. If the kitchen is dirty enough, you get the bacteria. And it doesn't matter whether the kitchen is in Palermo or in Pinner. In fact, if anything, the Brits were quite well known for this. I remember the then President of the European Parliament, a French woman called Nicole Fontaine, saying to me one day, "What is it about you English? You employ your wives and you sleep with your staff." And then I went on to the next one, and this was the person who advises you about what's called your general expenses account, frais généraux. So then it was about $3,500 a month. It's more now. And I said, oh, $3,500 a month. So that's to rent my office. Oh, no, we give you the office. I said, oh, okay, so computers. Oh, no, we give you all that. So what's it for then? Well, it's for incidental expenses like postage and petrol. I said, what? $3,500 a month? Well, so the guy almost winked at me. He said, there are no receipts. This is an unconditional allowance. You just tell us which bank account, and we pay it in every month. I said, well, you're telling me this is some hidden top-up tax-free salary. I didn't say that, sir. You said that. Look, I could spend the rest of the afternoon talking to you about the scams and abominations in the Brussels system. And you'd all be very cross. But there's a reason. I'm going somewhere with this. Actually, there are two reasons I'm telling you about my first day. The first is to emphasize the gap between theory and practice. Because the EU embodies a lofty ideal, because it stands for this dream of peace and cooperation among nations, there can be a temptation not to look at the real one, but to fantasize about some imaginary EU, to take our eyes off the grubby reality and imagine that we're voting on the theory of whether we should cooperate with our friends across the channel. Well, do you know what, guys? Can we take it as read that we're all in favour of cooperating and trading with our friends around the world? I don't think you'll find a single person on this panel, a single person in this room, who is against the idea of getting together with our immediate neighbours to do collectively what we can't do singly, to arbitrate our disputes, right? You'd have to be mad to be against that. Our problem is that the EU has become remote and corrupt and cut off from the people it purports to speak for. And the EU that we're actually going to vote for on the 23rd of June is not a theoretical one. It's the ugly, grubby, corrupt reality. I find myself particularly having this argument very often with friends on the centre-left. They'll say, yeah, I'm not in favour of this EU, I'm in favour of a different kind of EU, one that's based on social justice and democracy and respecting differences. And well, great, comrades, but that's not the one on the ballot paper. We have to choose between the EU as it is evolving, the thing it's turning into, or a different kind of relationship. And I want to give you now 5 reasons why I will be voting for a different kind of relationship. One which will put me and incidentally Amjad out of work. But we'll have no problem because of the boom in this country as a result of finding something else to do. And the first reason is this. The European Union has been made redundant by technological advance. The EU is a hangover, a relic of a top-down age. An age when freight costs were high, and refrigeration was expensive, and regional blocks looked like being the future. But as we heard Carl explain, that age has been overtaken by advances in communications. It's as easy today for a company in Bradford to do business with a company in Bahawalpur in Pakistan, or with Bangalore in India, as with a company in Bordeaux in France. In fact, it's easier. Because the firms on the subcontinent will be English-speaking, common law. If there's a dispute between the two parties, it will be arbitrated in a way that they both recognise. Because we are linked to India and Pakistan by language and law, by habit and history, by commerce and kinship. In an age when geographical proximity no longer defines us, it is crazy for us to be disregarding cultural ties in order to privilege accident of geography. It was a fairly dodgy argument, I think, even at the time, for us to abandon a genuinely global trading system in favour of a regional bloc. Right? When you think about it, the purpose of trade is to swap on the back of differences, right? The advantage of commerce is that you buy from somewhere else things that you can't produce yourself without prohibitive cost. So I wonder whether it ever really made sense for us to abandon a properly pluralist market, one where there were commodity-based economies, agrarian economies, service-based, industrial, financial, and exchanged it for a block of similar advanced Western European economies. I wonder whether that ever made sense. Whether we wouldn't have been better off being able to buy textiles and agrarian surpluses and commodities from elsewhere. But whether or not it made sense in the 70s, it certainly makes no sense today. The European Union is collapsing as a share of world trade. As recently as 1980, the EU was 30% of the world's economy, or at least the 28 countries that are now in the EU were 30% of the world's economy. Now, as we just heard, that figure is 17% and falling. It was 17% when we looked it up, right? That was a few hours ago. It's probably less than that already, because as the euro crisis kicks in, the European economy is contracting. We don't have to make the euro crisis our crisis. We have other options. Every region of the world is now experiencing economic growth except one. Now, I made a joke the other day, I say every continent is growing except Antarctica and Europe. But a friend of mine corrected me. The Antarctican economy, it turns out, is based on cruise ships and is booming. Right? We are in the world's only stagnant trade bloc. Everywhere else, North America, South America, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, everywhere else is growing, except Europe. Now, my friends, we are a trading people. We don't sit on great natural resources in this green, damp, exquisite island home of ours. We have to make our way in the world by what we buy and sell. That means we have to be where the customers are, and increasingly the customers are not in Europe. Which brings me to my second reason. We are paying for the privilege of belonging to the world's only stagnant trade war. Paying £350 million a day. Now you heard Amjad very well describe why we should use the gross rather than the net figure, right? The Yes campaigners always get very angry and say, oh, some of that money is spent here. Yeah. Yes, some of that money is spent here. Gosh, they're going to all these. As soon as I mention the Yes campaigners, look at how they're trying to sabotage it. It is true that of the 350 million quid a week that we send over, some is spent in Britain, but it's not spent on things that we'd have chosen for ourselves. It's very often spent on schemes whose chief purpose is to advertise the European Union, or else it's spent on purchasing the loyalty of powerful and articulate interest groups. Now, as you just heard, so it's 92 billion gross, about 10 million net, but where else in politics would we ever use the net figure? Can you imagine Andrea as an MP saying, well, ladies and gentlemen, you'll be delighted to hear that your income tax is no longer 20p in the pound basic rate. It's now 0 because you get it all back in roads and schools and hospitals, right? That's the exact equivalent argument. What counts is what we pay. And to put it in context, in the 2010 to 2015 Parliament, the austerity programme saved £36 billion across the whole of government spending. Over the lifetime of that same Parliament, our contribution to the EU budget was £82 billion. Even if we play this game of taking only the net rather than the gross contribution, it was still £42 billion, right? So just think about that. All of those austerity cuts, all of the demonstrations we had, the UK Uncut and the angry students and all the rest of it, one clean excision, this one item of our contribution to Brussels, would have wiped out the entire austerity programme and still have given us enough left over to take a penny off income tax. We are talking serious sums of money, but you know what? I think the bigger cost we pay is not the direct financial one, it's the democratic one. In this country, we elevated and we then exported the idea that laws should not be passed, nor taxes raised, except by our own elected representatives. In Brussels, we're run by the people whose names we all just failed to recognise. By people not just that you didn't vote for, but people that nobody voted for. By people, in fact, who very often owe their position in Brussels to having lost elections. Right? It's not just that it's undemocratic, we've uniquely invented a system in the world that is anti-democratic in the sense that you only get to go there after your voters have said no to you. It's only when like Neil Kinnock or Chris Patten or indeed Jean-Claude Juncker, who just lost the election in Luxembourg, it's only when you've been expressly rejected by your country that you are invited to come and vote. I've got to say, I think pointing out what's wrong with that system doesn't make you anti-Europe, right? You just heard Andrew say, I speak French, I speak Spanish, I love Europe. Right? If Britain were run this way, if we were governed by 28 unelected British commissioners, who as a result of being unelected, being invulnerable to the ballot box, had come out with such disasters as the euro, the common agricultural policy, the common fisheries policy, the Schengen zone, I'd be against that too. I hope all of you would be. It wouldn't make us anti-British. It wouldn't make us Anglo-skeptics. It would make us Democrats. Yeah. So reason number 1, the EU is redundant. Reason number 2, we're paying too much. Reason number 3, democracy. Reason number 4, global Britain. It's 2016. We are living out in real time, as it were, the grisly centenary of the First World War. On 2 occasions in the last 100 years, when this country was most in need, hundreds of thousands, millions of young men from every corner of the Empire and Commonwealth were prepared to cross half the world in order to take up arms
for a country on which, in most cases, they'd never set eyes, because they believed that our values stood for something. Exactly 100 years ago, from the trenches of Flanders to the alluvial plains of Mesopotamia, there were men under arms. 1 million volunteers from British India, including 400,000 Muslims. 1 million, all of them volunteers. There was no discussion. Every one of those men had made an individual decision to enlist. And when the call came again, a generation later, their sons made the same decision. 2.5 million volunteers from what's now Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, the largest volunteer army in the history of warfare. And now we find that the families of those men are struggling even to bring auntie over for a wedding. Not to settle here, just to visit, with all the paperwork you need now to get a visa, all the salary slips and all the rest of it. Why that crackdown? Because we have had to free up space to make room available for an unlimited number of EU nationals who may have zero connection to the United Kingdom. I've got to tell you, my friends, I think that policy is immoral. I think there's nothing wrong with remembering who our friends are and remembering where we have obligations around the world. But if that doesn't convince you, it's economically crazy. How have we reached the point where we are in practice being forced to turn away qualified medical staff, computer engineers, graduates from the Indian subcontinent in order to free up unlimited space for people, regardless of their qualifications, simply who happen to hold the EU passports, even if they have criminal records, even if they have no skills? Now, I don't want to be dishonest, right? I'm not arguing that we should have an open door migration policy vis-a-vis the Commonwealth any more than we should have open door vis-a-vis the European Union. All I'm asking for is fairness. All I'm asking for is equality so that people can compete on the basis of the skills they bring and their connections to this country instead of automatically going to the front of the queue because they happen to hold a little pink passport, regardless of whatever skills they bring with them. And that is something that can only happen when we leave the European Union and take back control of our own migration policy. And then my final reason, and it's, again, one that's been touched on earlier, but it's worth emphasizing. We face a choice between two futures. The status quo is not on the ballot paper. Voting to stay in is not the same thing as voting to stay put. We had this huge renegotiation process, right? Remember that Prime Minister spent 2 years travelling all over Europe, and then at the end what? What have we got back as a deal? Not one power returned, not one legal change. We're still voting on the existing EU. Now, what does that tell you? Right? Just think about it. Ask yourselves one question. If this is how the EU treats its second largest financial contributor now, before we vote on leaving, how would they treat us the day after we had voted to remain? The idea that Amjad and I could go back and start objecting to this or that proposal to take more power to Brussels, they would laugh at us. They'd say, forget it, guys. Your countrymen just voted to acquiesce in the whole process. It was very clear. You knew that you weren't getting any different terms. You still had the supremacy of EU law, you weren't getting any powers back, and you voted for it. So everything that's now coming, the military amalgamation, the fiscal, the political, the economic, all of that, don't now start complaining about it. You had your chance on the 23rd of June 2016. Let me put it like this. Imagine that you're on a bus, okay, and it's a bus that's going somewhere that you don't want to go. And it's not making any secret about that, right? At the front of the bus, it gives the destination very clearly, United States of Europe. Right? And just in case anyone has missed the point, the bus driver, who, now that you get a good look at him under his peaked cap, he looks very like Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission. The bus driver keeps turning around and telling you where the stops are going to be. You know, harmonisation of social security, harmonisation of tax, harmonisation of military capacity. If you don't want to go to that destination, what do you do? What's the closest thing to the status quo option? Do you literally remain immobile, frozen to your seat on that bus as it purrs along its route? Or doesn't it make more sense to step off the bus, wave it on its way? In other words, to say to our friends and allies, guys, if this is the way you are determined to go down the road towards political union, President of Europe, single currency, single tax system, single foreign policy, all the rest, fine. Do it with our goodwill, do it with our blessing. You'll always be able to rely on our support, on our alliance, on our open markets. But we will not compromise our democracy. We will not bargain with our independence. Two choices on the 23rd of June. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by. One road leads to the amalgamation of Europe, to a merger. We know that. We can see where it's going, they're not making any secret. The other leads to a trade-only relationship. One where we remain interested and involved in the affairs of Europe, but can give due weight also to our older alliances. One where we continue to trade with our friends and allies across the Channel, but take back control of our own laws. How can I be so sure that we get the good bits, that we keep the trade, if we leave the politics? Because every other non-EU state in Europe does. Right? From Iceland to Turkey, there are no tariffs, there are no trade barriers. Right? Every other non-EU country, the Isle of Man, Monaco, Montenegro, Macedonia, any of them, they all are part of a European free trade area. I've never heard anyone in Brussels, in the 17 years that I've been there, suggest that Britain would exclude itself from a European free trade zone because it had excluded itself from the political structures of Brussels. All we need is the confidence to take that step. All we need is a measure of self-belief. We are the 5th largest economy in the world, on course to overtake Germany. We are the 4th military power on the planet. We're one of 5 permanent seat holders at the UN Security Council. Our language is the most widely spoken by the human race. We have the world's capital city. We have the greatest soft power. We're a leading member of the Commonwealth, NATO, the G7, the G20. How much bigger do we have to be before we're able to run our own affairs in our own interest, trading and cooperating with our friends while living under our own laws?
Yeah.
This whole campaign comes down to whether we believe in ourselves and whether we believe in our country. This city is the one with the youngest population anywhere in the UK. On some measures, it has the youngest population anywhere in Europe. We need to think about the future, the world that kids in Bradford are growing up into. It's not the same Eurocentric world that we knew. All the growth is happening elsewhere, and Britain is blessed by ties of language and law, habit and history, kinship and migration. We are linked to other countries in a way that means we have other options. There is a bright future for us, if only we have the courage to raise our eyes to more distant horizons and rediscover that global vocation that we once took for granted. It was a long, wet and chilly winter, and spring was a long time in coming, but look now. Listen to the racket of the returning birdsong. Feel the pulsing life under our feet. See the buds come out. It's a wonderful time to be alive and to be in this country. How glorious spring is after a long and wet winter. High on the Yorkshire moors, the larks and the linnets are singing.
What a resounding speech. I'm certainly moved, and I think the majority of you are. I think we can all smell the beautiful aromas of masalas and tikkas, and I'm certainly salivating at the mouth, and I'm sure you are. So I think that we'd welcome a few questions, because I think many of you want to pray, and many of you want to tuck into that good Yorkshire food that's on offer. So, could I ask people to raise their hands that do ask a question, and please, would you kindly refrain from making statements? Please ask questions. If you do make a statement, make it short, but ask a question, so we have the possibility of outstanding people answering your questions. The gentleman on the far left, Sam, if you don't mind.
Thank you. On the 10th of March, the newly appointed French Prime Minister went to Berlin. He congratulated the German government on the fact that the Deutsche Exchange put in a bid to take over the London Stock Exchange. We are driving Europe. We, together, will take this forward. And then the German and French Prime Ministers went off together to Ukraine. Do you think that was a good example of Britain being involved in the decisions of Europe?
No.